Welcome to the Too Tall Sports Podcast. Glad to have you in as always. Thank you for joining me today. My interview coming up in a few minutes is with Michael McCoy. He is an Army officer. He's a veteran in the military, former Army officer, and he's in the reserves right now. He's also a corporate recruiter. He played college rugby, and he went to Mississippi State. So we talked about his career there, and he reached out to me about coming on the show, and I said, yeah, man, let's do it. So he's got some cool stories and pretty wild stories about being in the military and what life is like over there. And he works a lot with veterans that are transitioning out of the military, much like athletes transitioning out of sports and finding their place in life and trying to destigmatize the workplace that deals with hiring veterans. So good episode with him. Glad to have him on. Really nice guy. So after my 2 cents, you will hear my interview with Michael McCoy. But, you know, Tuesday, one of the best, you could argue the GOAT, one of the greatest players of all time, decided to announce his retirement. It was a little bit wishy-washy over the weekend, and finally he released a statement saying he was going to. And it's hard to say after 22 years, Tom Brady is retiring from football. And he's not my favorite quarterback. Let me just start by saying that, okay? But that doesn't matter because he still is the most accomplished, and most people would say the greatest quarterback of all time. I don't believe he's the most talented quarterback I've ever seen. And you could argue even before his era, guys like Dan Marino and John Elway, Brett Favre was more exciting, even though he's more of a gunslinger and threw a lot of interceptions, or this new crop, is Brady the most talented thrower of the football? I always lean toward Aaron Rodgers. To me, he's the best thrower of the football I've ever seen, but it would be wrong of me to say Rodgers is the best because he simply doesn't have the hardware. Now, a lot goes into being the best of all time. And I want to celebrate Brady. I don't want to take away from him, but I just like to provide perspective on what I see, right? Belichick was a huge part of the 20-year dominance in New England for Brady. A lot of the draft picks, he wasn't a great drafter of offensive skill players, but they had a ton of pro and all pro players in the New England system, especially on defense. And those early Super Bowls, some of it was because of the defense, right? Then they had a 10-year gap when the Patriots had no Super Bowls. And then they went to the Super Bowl against the Rams, and they only put up 13 points in the Super Bowl, but they held the Rams to 3. So there's a lot of defense involved there, right? But you could also argue and say they went to the Philadelphia Super Bowl and Nick Foles beat them, in a high-scoring game, and Brady did, put up 500 yards or something like that. So, look, you have to get a little bit of luck in your career, but for being drafted 199th overall, a 6th-round pick out of Michigan, having a really weak combine showing, before the draft, you rarely see a low drafted player like that become the greatest of all time. So what you can say about Brady is his meticulous attention to detail was off the charts. His leadership ability to galvanize troops and get the most out of everybody he played with, off the charts. And he took less money a lot to help Belichick build rosters that were competitive in the NFL, which is hard to do, especially if you're the man. And, after 10 years of being the man, he had a chance to, really take big money, and he always similarly chose not to. He demanded a lot from his teammates. He demanded a lot from himself. There's a little bit of that Jordan Kobe-ness to him where it was like, look, I work my ass off. You better do the same as well, or I'm not going to respect you. And we're not going to win if you don't. And I need all of you. So Brady would often yell at his teammates on the sideline and scream at people for doing the wrong thing or for, what he thought was wrong. And sometimes you got to get in guys' asses a little bit, sometimes you got to get on people. And he did that effectively, though. I don't think he was ever disrespectful off the field. He always wanted to work. He just wanted to put the work in. And I can appreciate that because consistency matters. And when you play at a high level for 22 years, and this dude just came off an MVP caliber season this year, that is some of the most impressive stuff I've ever seen. So, he's in the Jordan, Tiger Woods category. He is, and nobody really likes to anoint people the greatest. Even still, people are having a hard time saying Steph Curry is the greatest shooter of all time. It's pretty obvious that he is, but it's just hard to make people say that because everyone's like, well, what about this? What about this? No one wants to just say someone's the greatest without backlash. But with 7 Super Bowl rings and 5 MVPs in the Super Bowl, it's hard to argue against Brady being that guy, he turned Julian Edelman and Wes Welker into some of the best receivers in the league, and also that system, the Belichick way, was also the Brady system too. When you can bring a Darrelle Revis in from the miserable Jets and they go on to win a Super Bowl that year, that's the system, right? So it was half and half. I give half to Belichick, half to Brady for the 20 years in New England. Look, Randy Moss was a cast off in Oakland, right? He was a troublemaker, so to speak, comes to New England. They almost go undefeated in the season, right? And Brady put up historic numbers. Brady also played in an era with Peyton Manning, Big Ben, Phillip Rivers, Drew Brees. Eli Manning beat him twice, but he played in that same, he played in an era of really good, talented quarterbacks at the top, among the young guys as well. He had to beat Patrick Mahomes. He's had to beat some of the young guns, beat Aaron Rodgers, and he leaves New England after 20 years and he goes to Tampa right away and wins a Super Bowl. That Tampa team was 7-9, a couple of years ago, and he turns that team around. Now, this is where I got to put some perspective on things. Couple things real quick about New England. If we're being real, for 20 years, the Buffalo Bills, the New York Jets, and the Miami Dolphins were incompetent. Were literally worthless for 20 years. Except for 2 random seasons where Mark Sanchez was in New York with the Jets and they went to the AFC Championship game. Outside of that, the Bills never had a franchise quarterback until Josh Allen got there a couple of years ago. The Dolphins never had a franchise quarterback either. Ryan Tannehill wasn't good there. He's better in Tennessee now. And you're damn sure the Jets didn't have a franchise quarterback, right? So I call it the AFC least, even though it's the AFC East, because it was the weakest division in football for 20 years. Let's call it what it is. So oftentimes the Patriots, not their fault, but they would get a bye in the first round and 2 home playoff games, and then they're in the Super Bowl every year that they win. Let's just have some context here, okay? This is kind of like when LeBron was in the Eastern Conference and all the players were loaded up in the Western Conference. Not a tough road to get to, okay? It just wasn't. I'm sorry, it just wasn't. So I know you can't control your schedule, but it wasn't that tough. So you really didn't have a tough matchup till the round 2 or 3 of the playoffs there for Brady. But he did what he had to do. The comeback against Atlanta was incredible. 28-3. They had no business winning that game, and Brady brought him back, and that was an amazing comeback. Can't knock him. That was amazing. So, and let me just say this about his Tampa time. He did turn around a roster that was okay, but let's be real. They had the number 1 defense one of those years. They had an all-star team there on offense, okay? So he gets there with Chris Godwin and Mike Evans, superstar receivers. He brings in Leonard Fournette, or at least Tampa does, former stud with Jacksonville, didn't want him. He clearly can still play. Look at Fournette this year. He came back and did great. He brought over Gronk, who's one of the best tight ends of all time, still catching touchdowns in the Super Bowl. And like him or not, the wacko that he is, Antonio Brown, the dude caught touchdowns in the Super Bowl, okay? And he's still one of the best receivers in the league when his mind is hopefully on football, which it rarely is. But let's not act like, they got all pro offensive linemen in Tampa. Let's not act like they had the best run defense last year. Tampa had an all-star team. Now, did Tom ever have a team like that in New England? No, not really. So he got to play with an all-star team, and look what happened. They won the Super Bowl. So, and last year, I will say, he had to go on the road and beat Aaron Rodgers. He had to go on the road for all the games until the home Super Bowl, which he was lucky enough to have. But Tom Brady earned everything he had work-wise, right? The work ethic was unmatched. His consistency, his accuracy as a thrower was unmatched. He got the ball out of his hand quickly. He didn't take a lot of big hits when he didn't need to. And he just knew where everybody had to be, and he studied and studied and studied. He was a student of the game, and it's weird to see him go. As much as I've randomly hated on him sometimes over the years, it is weird to see a player of that caliber leave. And the league has this whole new crop of young quarterbacks coming up: Burrow, Josh Allen, Mahomes, Herbert. You could add Kyler Murray in there. You got lots of these young quarterbacks that are on the come up, and it's going to be exciting to watch. And it's going to be weird. Big Ben retired and Brady now retired. You had Rivers retire a couple of years ago. Who knows what's going on with Aaron Rodgers? Breeze is gone. there's a changing of the guard happening in the NFL. And I think the NFL is in great hands moving forward. But the NFC is going to be awfully weak next year. You know, you really look at it, if Rodgers stays in Green Bay, you pretty much got them, if you believe in the Cowboys, record-wise. The Rams, obviously, are going to be there. Is Arizona good? I don't know. Like, is anyone else good in the NFC? So I don't know. The NFC is pretty weak right now. All the talent's in the AFC. If you think about it, all the young quarterbacks are in the AFC. So, but I think it's still, hey, the NFL, you know, the ratings are up this year. It's an exciting league. The league is in good hands. It's going to be exciting to watch the Super Bowl. I know we have 2 weeks till that, so I'm going to save my Super Bowl picks for next week. Early favorite is the Rams. Obviously, they're playing a home Super Bowl game in Los Angeles at SoFi. Cincinnati's never been there before. McVay's been there. You got a veteran group, you know, with the Rams. Von Miller's been there before, won Super Bowl MVP already. You got a veteran group there. So Aaron Donald's been to it. So I would lean toward the Rams. Do I think Cincinnati may cover if it's 4.5 right now? It may move by the time next week happens, but Cincinnati may cover. I think it's going to be a close game. It may come down to a field goal at the end, but I'll reserve my pick for next week. Early reaction, of course, Rams money line sounds right, but you never know. Los Angeles is not a home field advantage, as we saw with the Niner game. So, you know, I would have gone into all that stuff today, but I just wanted to keep it tight to about 10, 12 minutes here about Brady. But, you know, he deserves his own 2-cent segment, even from me. So congrats to Tom Brady on an amazing career. There's not much you can say, man. He did it all. 22 years, still played at a high level, you know, led the league in touchdown passes this year, I think in yards. Like, what are you going to say? Like, he's incredible. So anyway, feel free to drop your thoughts, you know, anytime to me at Too Tall Sports Podcast. Hit me up there. And man, what a career for Tom Brady. So I had to give him his own 2-cent segment, but he deserves it, man. He's in that upper echelon class, and he'll be a Hall of Famer soon enough. So anyway, thank you for listening to my 2-cent segment. Enjoy my interview with Michael McCoy, the former Army veteran, and he's now a corporate recruiter trying to help vets transition out of the military and into real life. Like I mentioned off the top, much like a lot of athletes struggle with that transition. So really cool episode. Nice guy. We talk about he grew up in Mississippi, and, you know, his days, you know, the big rivalry between Ole Miss and Mississippi State. So anyway, you'll enjoy the interview, and let's get to it right now. What's going on? This is the Too Tall Sports Podcast. My guest today is Michael McCoy. He is an Army veteran, former Army officer, former rugby player as well. During his high school and college career, he went to Mississippi State, and we talk all about his experience growing up there, either between Ole Miss or Mississippi State. There is no in between. So we talk about his upbringing, but also he is a corporate recruiter who helps people transition, whether it's veterans or athletes, transition into civilian life, into the real world. And a lot of us go through that when we lose our passions. And he's somebody in the recruiting world that helps people transition, especially helping veterans as well, because there's a stigma around hiring veterans in this country. So my talk today, an interview, is with Michael McCoy, a really nice guy from Tennessee, and he's a Titans fan. So we do a little Titans at the end as well. As always, you can follow me at Too Tall Sports Podcast. That's on Instagram. On Twitter, it's at Too Tall Sports. You can check out my YouTube channel if you want to watch the interviews. We drop them every Thursday morning, 5 a.m. Pacific time. And you can check out my interviews while you can see us on camera. So if you like that style, please go ahead over there and subscribe to my YouTube channel, Too Tall Sports Podcast. Please like, share, you know, leave a review, comment, anything you can do to help the show, that'd be great. On the audio side, it's going to be Apple Podcasts. Same thing, type in Too Tall Sports Podcast. I got, I think, 74 5-star ratings. If you could get to 75, if somebody out there hasn't done it yet, that'd be awesome. Looking to get to 100 plus. Obviously, you know, every week I try to add more ratings. So if you could scroll down on the episodes page on Apple and now Spotify, by the way, you can hit the 5-star on both of those accounts when you guys listen to your audio podcast. So hit me up on Spotify or Apple. 5 stars. If you could, leave a review on Apple if you haven't done that already at the bottom. That'd be great. Really helps the show. We're also on Pandora, Amazon Music, Google Play, wherever you get your podcasts. We're probably there. Just type in Too Tall Sports Podcast and you'll find the show. Enjoy my interview with Michael McCoy. Okay, welcome back to the Too Tall Sports Podcast. My next guest is an Army veteran turned career transition leader and mentor. He specializes in corporate recruiting and helps vets find their place in civilian life, much like athletes after their careers end. He works for Premise Health in Nashville, Tennessee, and he's also a Titans fan, of course. He's originally from Mississippi, and he's here to tell us his story and what life is like in the Army, inside and out. He is Mike McCoy. Thanks for being on the show, Mike.
Hey, Brad, I appreciate it. Great to be here.
Yeah, definitely. Glad to have you. I'm glad you reached out. And, I don't often get, Army veterans and people that experience that, but it is kind of similar to athletes transitioning to real life. So, it's great to have you on and give us your story here. Before we get to what you're up to now, I just kind of want to dive into your background a little bit. So you live in Nashville currently, but you grew up in Mississippi. What city were you in, and kind of what was life, early life like for you?
Yeah, so I grew up in Central Mississippi in Madison. So went to Madison Central. Famous alumni is the kicker Goskowski.
Oh,
so
okay.
He was on the '99 championship team. I remember as a little kid going to that, and then like every time we saw, he was in the league for a lot of years. I'm like, he went to my high school. So
Goskowski was legit for the Patriots, man.
Yeah, so that was our claim to fame. We won only one high school state championship from like '99 to I think they won it this year too. But it was a long drought, and Goskowski, was the game winner right there.
Sure. And you got into rugby because you and I talked pre-show, and I was surprised to hear that because Mississippi or the South is a huge football hotbed. So what made you lean toward rugby versus football?
Yeah, so I was really involved in the Middle Tennessee community or Middle Mississippi community in the military space, even in a young age in the JRTC. And our rugby coach was an Army officer, a friend of my family. And he was like, hey, let's start a youth rugby team, because they had a men's league, and they were going to these tournaments, and they would have a youth league game before usually whatever men's team, like their kids and whatever, would all come and play. And so they were like, hey, let's put this together. And so a bunch of us got together and started playing rugby and, bashing each other in a little bit. And it's football without pads, that you can't throw the ball forward. And there's a lot more people, and it's a lot bigger field, and it's, you just don't stop. So it's a cool sport.
I never watch rugby, but it's like, it's exactly, it's hitting without pads. Like, do you have any major injuries from your time playing rugby?
Nothing major. Yeah. I got a good gash in my eyebrow when I was a kid. I just took like an elbow or a knee, and I just like came up, and I'm just like covered in blood. We had white jerseys, and I'm like, what's on my face? And like I look down, I'm just soaked in blood. And like driving down the road, like you're on the interstate, and like you're like holding pressure to it, and you pull up to a stoplight, and this guy next to me was like, bro, what happened to you? I was like, you should see the other guy. And he was like, what? But yeah, that was the only big injury. Our coach, that was the Army officer though, he broke his leg in the middle of a game, kept playing, and finally it was like, my leg hurts. And like came and sat down, and we were like looking at it, and he had like just snapped it, and it was like a stretch fracture, and it was slowly like breaking, and you could like feel it. And we were like, that doesn't look great.
No,
you're not young. You should stop. So yeah, it was that was the worst injury I ever saw out there. But generally it's, the helmet's what hurts people, they say. So,
and maybe you hit a little bit differently without pads on.
More technique, more like going for the gut and stuff. So it's a little different.
Yeah, no, for sure. Now, when you were in high school, what kind of drew you into playing, playing rugby, not just youth league, but like actually playing in high school? What were your thoughts on did you see a future in playing rugby at that point?
So it was still really small in Mississippi. So there was like 6 teams. And you would go around, and some of the schools had rec teams, and it was a good way to stay in shape and meet different people. We were actually we went down to Destin, we went down to New Orleans and played some teams, we went to Memphis and played some teams. Oxford had a team, so we were always up there. And it was a good way to get around, but it wasn't ever a big enough thing in the South to surpass football. It was always going to be like a rec league thing. So
sure.
I didn't see it really panning out well, but you stayed in shape. You were conditioned a lot better than a lot of guys. So.
Yeah, no, I bet. And you decided to stay in state for college and go to Mississippi State. Were there any other schools you were thinking about going to? What kind of made you want to stay closer to home?
Yeah, so my high school had graduated like 800 people. I think 400 went to Mississippi State, 400 went to Ole Miss. And so, everybody was going one or the other. We had like 2 smart kids that went to other schools, and the rest of us were like, we're going to stay here. So obviously looked at Ole Miss. I can remember being a kid and remembering the Manning years at Ole Miss. We had tickets. Back in the day, tickets were a lot easier to get for free. And so like everyone was always like, hey, go watch Eli Manning play. He's really kind of something special. And you grow up in Mississippi, you obviously were a Saints fan and you had Archie. And so it was a different time in football back then. And, now Lane Kiffin's trying to bring it back around at Ole Miss. And so, but stayed at State, just better alignment on what I wanted to do. And so went there.
Yeah. And I believe you played rugby in college as well, right?
I played for 2 years.
Yeah.
So RTC was actually why I had to stop. They were like, hey, look, you get hurt, you can't do this anymore because you can't meet your commitment. You break a leg and you basically fail medical waivers. So I was like, I think I'm gonna go the long-term career route. But played there for 2 years, had a lot of fun. Got to see a lot of other schools and programs. A lot of the guys that we played rugby with, I'm still friends with, stay in touch with. High school guys that I played with, I stay in touch with all those. So one of our guys and our coach just opened a restaurant in town. So, need to get back down there and see him. So
yeah, definitely. Now, was it your youth rugby coach that got you into the ROTC stuff, or what kind of got you going that way versus just being a regular college kid?
Yeah. So my dad was in the Army, so I always kind of knew I was going to be in the military. His dad was in the Army, his uncle.
Okay.
So lots of family, World War II vets going way back. And so knew that was the route that I wanted to take, and knew that was a different direction versus, just, hey, enlisting after high school and going in. Went the officer route, just a kind of different career path. My dad was enlisted and I'm the officer. So
before we get to your Army stuff, I just want to ask, because I had to look this up. I always knew Starkville, Mississippi was called Stark Vegas, but I wasn't sure why. And it seems like a fun place to be now, but apparently it was like not affectionately named that back in the day because there wasn't much going on there. So tell us about what the college life was like in Stark Vegas, aka Starkville.
Yeah, so I was there 8 to 12. So last year of Croom, first couple of years of Mullen, Prescott was there my senior year.
That's right. Dak was there.
Yeah. So Dak was there. It's in the middle of a cow pasture. Area wise, it is one of the largest land grant universities in the United States. And so when you drive on a campus, you drove through some type of field or cornfield or soybeans or cows or whatever. And so you didn't have a lot of going out into other places and going to stuff. You had a couple of bars, a couple of places you could go and visit. And, now I've went back a couple of times and, they got Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A wasn't a thing when I was there. These kids are spoiled.
Right.
They got a chicken place on every corner.
So yeah, for sure. For those of us that didn't grow up in Mississippi, is the Ole Miss Mississippi State, is that like a big time rivalry?
Oh, it's a big time thing.
Yeah.
You'll have people that I can't date you. You went to Ole Miss. Or I can't date you. You went to Mississippi State. It's generational. I mean, people will forever be, hey, I'm an Ole Miss alumni, or they're the black sheep of the family because everybody went to State and they went to Ole Miss. And
wow,
it's a big deal. It's real. House divided for sure.
Okay, gotcha. Did you have any family members that went to Ole Miss?
I didn't.
Okay, so everybody went to State.
WVU. Yep.
Or West Virginia?
West Virginia. So
got it. Okay, gotcha. So let's get to life in the Army. So I'm assuming you graduate college and then I guess, were enlisted. So how does it all work? What's the process from going from college to you're in the Army now?
Yeah, so you graduate, you commission, you become an officer, and that's right away. And when you do that, you are immediately becoming an officer. And so I went to Fort Benning, Georgia, and went through my officer school, became a tank commander. You go through, it's about a 6-month course. You're learning how to do all of the things that an officer is required to do. You're doing physical fitness, you're doing all that different stuff, shooting tanks, running, jumping, doing obstacle courses, all the stuff you see in the good old Stripes Bill Murray movie. We did all that. And, you just kind of came out and you were like, all right, you get your assignment of where you're going to go and you just start your career.
Gotcha. Speaking of Bill Murray, are there there's some decent military or Army movies? Do you have a favorite one or two that stick out?
I would say definitely probably Stripes.
Okay.
So my dad was in Germany in the 80s. And then I deployed over to Europe in the 2000s. So it's always been a good movie to kind of look back on and laugh. So.
Gotcha. Have you ever seen In the Army Now with Pauly Shore?
Also a great movie.
Really fun.
You're my first sergeant. Well, technically you're not my first sergeant. That's just the best. It's the best.
Yeah, there's a lot of great, obviously war movies, but yeah, those kind of funny ones are good too. I saw that when you were younger, you were actually sent down to Pascagoula, Mississippi. Thank you for the pronunciation. Right after Hurricane Katrina, you weren't actually in New Orleans, but you got to help folks down there. What was that like mentally for you, just seeing all that, and as the process of helping people down there?
Yeah, so that was a great experience, and we went down. We were actually there the day after Katrina made landfall. We lived about 2.5 hours north of town, and came down. Had some family friends that lived about 5 blocks off the coast, and the street across from them everything was just sticks, and about 2 streets up, everything was literally gone. And so we went down there and we cleaned up and we worked with the Red Cross. We served meals. We went and drove around and they're called IRVs, urban response vehicles. And you just literally, you make plates and you hand out food. And we did that for almost 3 weeks. We were just down there. School was out. I was still in high school. So, there was no school. School didn't have power. And then we were like, well, let's go down. And it was originally going to be like a couple of day thing. And we just got plugged into that network of Red Cross people and other groups. And my dad kind of took that Army side and like was like, hey, well, look, we can do this, this, and this. And he kind of ran the logistics side at a church where they were cooking food, and the Red Cross heard about it and they came over and they were using that as their kitchen, and we were serving food. And basically I rode around because back then you didn't have like tons of GPSs. And so like I had maps. And they were like, you have a map? And I was like, yeah. And they were like, let's talk. And so we just basically drew lines and we're like, hey, like this area, gone, no houses. And so you just kind of just drove around and like handed out food and gave it to people. And you were like, what do you need? Do you need cases of water? Do you need clothes? Like, here's where the shelters are. So we did that for almost 3 full weeks, went back down a couple weeks later and brought some more supplies to the crews that we had met. But it was incredible. We the house where we were staying, like I said, was 5 blocks off the water, about 3 houses up, and they lived on a golf course, and a tree was a 4-wheeler about 30 feet up, a full size 4-wheeler. And you're just thinking like wind and water was just sloshing everywhere, and just like it's like a tornado and a tidal wave at the same time is the eye of a hurricane. Wow. So it was crazy seeing that stuff.
Is that the craziest thing you've seen stateside, like in the US?
Probably, yeah. I mean, you literally, you walk through and you just see a concrete slab, or like there's a tree there and it's just like house parts wrapped around the tree. It's crazy.
Wow. That is pretty wild. And I mean, that you were still in high school, you said, right? So that was like, you were young then. That's tough to see. So let's get to life on the road. It can be difficult for an athlete. I went through it, being away from home, all that stuff. And you kind of have to mentally handle all the stuff of being away and not knowing when you're coming home sometimes. But I mean, obviously for a soldier or, someone in the Army, it's much different, much tougher. You guys actually have something at stake. We're just, as a baseball, I'm just trying to get people out,
That's right.
You're trying to stay alive. So what was it like, for you being on the road, not being able to tell people where you were all the time, the whole experience when you were gone?
Yeah. So our build up, our deployment was to Ukraine, and we kind of didn't know at first of like, hey, what was going to be our mission? What were we going to do? And so we went in 2018 through 2019. There's active armed conflict going on over there. We were going through a partnership with NATO. And so they were like, hey, not sure what you're going to be doing. Take all your stuff. You guys, you're going to pack up, you're going to go, and, you're going to be embedded with the Ukrainian military, and you're going to be advising them on different things of how to be a professional military, how to build professionalism in their ranks. And you're like, all right, well, not sure what that means, what we're going to do. And we were gone and over there for about 9 months. They had a couple skirmishes while we were there. On the other side of the country, we ended up being posted up on the east side, and everything kind of was happening on the western side of Ukraine, which it's still today a pretty hot spot across the globe, and some potential conflicts going on back over there. So
yeah, and one of the things you had to do was learn, I guess, or have cultural appreciation training when you were over there, dealing with other countries, some of the residents there or civilians there. How did you prep your soldiers to handle being in someone else's country?
Yeah, so it's all, you start with respect. You're going to get a course from somebody who maybe lived there in the last 20 years or is just like a studied expert. And you got to say, hey, look, take this with a grain of salt, lead with respect, be as polite as you can. Understand we had to learn some basic language to be able to say hello, thank you, ask for stuff, and learn those different aspects. Obviously, we were there in a different capacity than if we'd been in Iraq or Afghanistan. And so it was, hey, learning and engaging and coaching and mentoring. And you couldn't just kind of go in and be like, hey, you guys aren't doing this right. This is how we've done it. This is what has made us successful. And kind of like if you're a new coach, you were over there coaching, mentoring, and training these guys and talking about how we do it, nationalization of the military, standardization, modernization, kind of the key factors that NATO was looking for them to be able to join. And so that was a big piece of what we did was, hey, coach, mentor, and train, and just be polite, be kind, understand that, some of these people have been in the military since like the Soviet era, or their parents were in the military in the Soviet era. And this is like a family legacy as much as it is for us. And their generations are a little bit different, of their history looks different than ours. And you just have to be kind and understand what they're going through.
Did you get the sense that, because America has a bad rap for being like arrogant and overpowering and, we're better than everybody else. Did you get that sense when you were in Ukraine that people look at us that way?
Not in Ukraine, no. They were pretty appreciative. Plus, we spent a lot of money when we were there.
So you're
And so
helping
it
the
was,
economy a little
yeah,
bit?
so we were helping the economy. We got to purchase a lot of things on the local economy. Grocery shop, for example, the grocery stores that we went to, eventually they all knew us. Like they were really, really nice and kind, and everybody was really appreciative of us being around, because we knew that they'd had a couple of rough years and were trying to stabilize their borders and professionalize their military, and having Americans there added a little bit of extra security blanket of like, hey, something major isn't really going to happen at this time. So
Gotcha.
they were super appreciative.
Okay. No, I'm sure. Now, were you just on mainly the training side? Were you actually in hand-to-hand combat, like, all that stuff?
No, so they wouldn't let us go past a certain like line of in the country. And so we couldn't go past that, but we had guys coming back from the Ukrainian military that had been actively engaged. And there's a big battle that was in the conflict called the Battle of the Donetsk Airport. And so we had a lot of guys that had just rotated back through there and heard their stories and kind of what they went through. And they basically had a brand new Major League Soccer stadium that they built and a brand new airport for a World Cup Series match. And it became a war zone. And they were fighting from like one end to the other with sandbags, and these guys are telling us about that. And then we're over here like, hey, you got to write your operations orders in this way. And they're like, we don't care. When the bullets start flying, you just shoot back, shoot in the right direction. So, there's a little bit of apprehension of like, you guys don't know what you're talking about. And so, we had to overcome those objections. But generally speaking, we didn't have to go do anything like that. But a lot of the Ukrainians we were working with were directly from that.
Wow, that is pretty intense environment there. It's luckily you didn't have to be a part of that. From what you can say, what was maybe something that anything crazy that you can talk about that you saw?
Yeah. So, the biggest thing that we saw when we were there was the Russian military took over 3 Ukrainian naval vessels. And so they locked us all down, and I was the logistics officer for our area. And so worked with our senior leaders to be like, hey, if we have to leave in 24 hours, how are we going to do that? What are we going to leave? What are we going to take? You have to be like, hey, your box of personal gear, it's not going. We're loading up in vans and buses and trucks, and like we're going to take sensitive items, which in the military parlance is like guns and sights and weapons and stuff. And so like we were like, hey, we're going to take that, and your clothes are staying. And if we have to jet out in 24 hours, because they locked the entire country down, and we're American soldiers, that generally is a high value target for other countries. And so we were like, if we have to get out of here immediately, we have to be able to, like, we have an alert, we practice it, we practice loading in the vehicles, we practice getting everybody out. And so we talked about it, and that was the biggest thing. It happened in the winter of 18. And so going into like through Christmas and everything, we were really kind of just locked in on base, and like, hey, you can't go anywhere. You got to kind of stay close. We got to know where you're at. No traveling. So it was a pretty intense time for a while.
Wow. So for somebody that has, I mean, it's one thing to visit a country, but it's another thing to actually live there. What's maybe something that you missed while you were in, Ukraine versus in the States?
Man, I'll tell you what, it was so cold. I missed warm weather. It's way far north. And so it's kind of on the same parallel as Maine and has a similar temperature. So that was something I missed, was the warm weather. But being able to go in a shop, if it wasn't one of the main shops in a town, they didn't speak English. And so you were pointing and trying to talk with your hands of like what you needed. We had local cell phones. And so like going and paying our cell phone bill was always a challenge. Like, hey, here's money. Can you make my cell phone work again? And so stuff like that was always a challenge. Things that we had we had interpreters that would go with us for stuff that they would help us. But, being able to be self-sufficient to a certain extent was always a challenge.
Sure, definitely. Now let's talk about you coming back. You decide to move back to Nashville, not go home to Mississippi. What was the transition like, first of all, for you? And also why Nashville when you came back?
Yeah. So I relocated to Nashville after active duty time in the early 2000s. And so met my wife here. My family was here. So I'd moved out of Mississippi already. And so that was a easy transition back home for that to Nashville.
Gotcha.
But Mississippi it's a great place, but there's not a lot going on down there.
Sure.
More opportunities and jobs is how I ended up in Nashville. But that transition home, there's a lot of laws in place to protect service members. And so like, hey, a law is that you have to hold a service member's job. And so because of what the position I'm in the National Guard, we left full-time jobs 18 months earlier. And so a lot of people had either, depends on the size of the company and the type of job, had either quit their jobs or had a job to go back to, and they just had somebody filling in temporarily, which was the situation where I was. They had a basically people covering what I did at a nonprofit to keep the lights on and keep things going.
Sure.
But a lot of guys, before we left, we did resume reviews. We talked to career counselors. We did chats and talks and stuff with people who were hiring back here. And so helped guys who had quit their jobs transition back a little effectively. For me, I had a job to go back to. And so I was actually doing like career coaching and mentoring and counseling before I left. So I helped lead a lot of those programs while we were in country.
So that probably made it a little bit easier for you to come back home knowing you had a career that you could fall back on. Whereas a lot of these guys may not, their whole life is the minute they graduate high school, they're going to the military. So, and I know you've worked with some athletes before too, along with military veterans. How do you compare the two, or what are some of the common challenges you see from people that are having what I would call an identity crisis as they come back home to regular life?
Yeah, 100%. So did some research like you did before and watched Moneyball again before this. And there's the one part where the scout's like, hey, it doesn't matter. One day somebody's going to say you can't play anymore, whether you're 18 or you're 40. That call's going to come. You can't do this ever again. Right. And that's the same way for an athlete, for the military. And eventually you can't ever do that thing again. And, being able to say, hey, who am I outside of my uniform, whether that's a football uniform, a baseball uniform, or a military uniform. And so thinking about, hey, what what actions do I want to do every day? What am I good at? What do I enjoy? Because there's a lot of people who, whether they're athletes or service members, are like, I don't have any skills. I can't do that. Well, that's not true. You're really good at holding a conversation. That's a skill that you probably didn't think of, like, hey, this is what I thought I wanted to do. Having conversations with people of drawing out different things from inside of you, of like, hey, I want to talk to people, or I don't want to talk to people. I want to sit, I want to stand, I want to walk, I want to talk, whatever that looks like. And you're going through that challenge of figuring out who you are. Start with the things that you don't want to do. I don't want to do this. I don't want to work in a call center. I don't want to, I don't want to be an IT person. I don't want to do whatever. I don't want to do sales. That's a big one. And, have that list and redline it and say, hey, these are the things I know I don't want to do. And then kind of backwards plan of like, hey, I would be willing to do this, or I want to learn more about that. And then have informational interviews with people and say, hey, what do you do every day? What does your job really look like? What is a project manager? What is a sales operations specialist? What is any of these things? And how can I be successful taking the skills that I have, whether from sports or from the military, to do that?
Sure.
So,
and I was also thinking, like, sports is a passion per se, but do you feel like being in the military is also a passion for people, or it's just, this is what I know and that's it? Is it like, did you feel that people were passionate about being in the military as well as just being there?
oh yeah. I mean, I'm sure just like in sports, there's some people who are like, man, I'm just the perfect athlete, and this is just what I do, man. I just hit homers.
Yeah.
And there's, you get some guys that they didn't have a choice, or they didn't know of what other options to do with their
Right.
life. But generally speaking, everybody wants to be there, and so they're actively enjoying what they do. They have lots of going on. They're getting better at their craft. They're passionate about it, and it's a big part of who their identity is. And that's why you see so many old timers at Waffle House with your black veterans cap on.
Right.
And so that's who they are. That's what they were passionate about. And so, you got to be able to figure out, like, hey, I'm passionate about this, but now I need something else to pay the bills.
Sure.
And you can't lose or say, hey, I've lost who I am. You can still be passionate about that, still be engaged in that community. You do your podcast, veterans give back, whether that's through volunteering or coaching or helping other veterans, those types of things. And so you just got to not, when this sounds easier than it really is, don't get down on yourself. Don't think, oh, well, I can never be happy again because I can't be that ever again. You can continue to harness that same energy and figure out how can you point it in a new direction.
Do you feel like there is a stigma about hiring veterans in this country? Do you think there's something, people look down on them for whatever reason, or they just don't have the skills like a lot of them have told you? What do you think it's, the overall view of veterans is like in the working world?
Yeah, no, I would say, we talked a little bit about movies. You think of veterans who have seen combat, Rambo, Saving Private Ryan, the character of Tom Hanks's character and Matt Damon's character and stuff, and like they've seen these atrocities of war and things, and they're never going to be okay. They can't be an analyst. They can't run spreadsheets. They can't do this. And there's that stigma that veterans are broken, or they all have PTSD, or they're all going to be angry and yell at you when you get to work, and just super demanding. And that's generally speaking not the case. There's still some people that are like the boss that are like, hey, why are you late? But you got to know your environment and who you're working with. In the Army right now today, super technologically focused. Everybody's using Microsoft 365. I mean, I've got a soldier that, this dude is a whiz at Excel. Like, he is killing it at Excel. He and I were talking just last week of like, hey, get you a professional certification on your resume, and I can guarantee you can almost double your income, just because he knows how to do it, and he's just not pointing it in the right direction. And so, overcoming those challenges of like, hey, every veteran is broken, or every veteran's angry, or they don't have any skills, or whatever that stigma is, which it still exists for sure. There's tons of, everybody talks about bias in hiring, and very much in the veteran space there is. And so, people like myself, people in the community that are advocating for veterans helps break that stigma. Say, hey, this isn't everybody. This is what you can do to help veterans be successful. Ask these questions, understand this lingo. What does this mean when they say, XYZ? And just having a source or somebody in your community you can ask. And honestly, you can ask the veteran. They're willing to talk about it. They're willing to share what they know and who they are and what they want to do and be successful, because they, generally speaking, have been very successful in their careers. They've had, high opportunities, a lot of opportunities to be high performers, and they just want to continue to do that. They want to do great jobs and great things for the organization that they join, and they just are looking for the opportunity. Maybe the resume doesn't say the right things, or it doesn't look like it's 100% right experience, but they probably have done a different job every 3 years for the last 20 years, so they don't know what to put. They've utilized technology, they've utilized all these other skills and having conversations. And so making sure that they articulate that the best, and is the best way to overcome that is have a conversation with them. So
no, for sure. I was going to ask you about, did you personally have any like psychological issues coming back, or had to go to like therapy or anything like that? You personally, I'm sure other guys that have. What was your experience? And then also, do you also direct people that route as well if you feel like they need that?
Oh yeah, 100%. Today's day and age, we definitely see a bigger push for mental health, and people, it's less stigmatized. When I started in the Army 2011, we had guys that had just rotated back through Iraq and different things like that. And you go through a periodic health assessment once a year, and you have a provider, you have behavioral health people there. And I can remember where there weren't lines at those types of spots. And now, hey, making sure that you're getting the help that you needed is not seen as a weakness. And so for sure, see that. We definitely had a lot of guys that came back and sought different things, more generally speaking, for relationship issues. Hey, you've been away from your wife for a year. How do you rekindle that? How do you have those conversations again? Things like that is really more what we saw for our specific deployment, the last one to Ukraine. More so than something else.
Gotcha. No, that's great. I think it's definitely destigmatized now. Hopefully, mental health is a huge deal. I'm sure for everybody that's in the armed service, armed forces, it's a huge help for them. So speaking of you helping people, let's talk about some of your nonprofit stuff going on. Nashville is also known as Music City. So I want to talk to you about LinkedIn Music City, which is a program that you're a part of. Tell us about that and what got you involved there.
Yeah. So a couple years ago, 2016, everybody was starting the networking thing and getting people together. LinkedIn was getting huge. And so we started hosting different networking events. We've called them different things over the years. Right now, since 2018, we've called it LinkedIn Music City, to kind of bring your online network offline, in person, help people. We've had different people come and speak. We've done roundtables, all kinds of different stuff. Colin Yankee, who's a Army veteran, he's the Tractor Supply Chief Supply Chain Officer, came out and spoke a couple of times. Colin Mooney, who was a Tennessee Titan, Army veteran, he came out and talked about his transition. He went active duty, and then kind of the same process as Alejandro Villanueva, went active duty and then came back and went in the NFL. So a little bit different process there. And so just talking to guys like that and bringing their stories to the forefront of what they're trying to do and in the community and build those networks, build those relationships is a big piece of what LinkedIn Music City does and what we do kind of off the side of our desk of, hey, you need some help. You're transitioning. You're trying to figure out what you want to do. Let's have a conversation. Let's point you in the right direction. What does that look like? Things like that. So
yeah, no, that's awesome, man. Those are great programs. Because I didn't realize how many Saints fans were in Mississippi. Did you grow up a Saints fan?
I did. So, okay. Everybody, like I said, is either an Ole Miss or Mississippi State fan. And so Archie, most of my parents' generation, they all grew up on the Archie years, and they went to Ole Miss and, the 65 national championship. And then Archie went into the league. And so everybody was a Saints fan, and, lots of rough years down there, but then post Katrina won a Super Bowl. So everybody's south of there. You sometimes were a Houston fan if you like relocated from Texas, but generally speaking, it's like that I-65 corridor, the 55 corridor. You were a Saints fan.
So you gave it up though when you went to Tennessee?
Yeah, I'm all in. I've got shirts now. I've got like 6 different hats. I'm a big hat
Cool.
guy. So
that's
yeah,
awesome. You should embrace the city that you're in.
Oh yeah.
Let's talk about what you're doing job-wise now. So obviously you're a corporate recruiter. I know you're helping veterans as well, but just in general, helping, normal, regular people that are I guess you call them civilians. What kinds of things are you doing now job-wise?
Yeah. So what we do is Premise Health is a healthcare company. We're in 45 states and Guam. And so I do a lot of the corporate recruiting, about half. And so that is all different types of roles, from IT to senior leadership and everything in between. And just have lots of conversations with people and figure out what they're looking to do, what their skills are, and bring them in and read lots of resumes and have lots of conversations and see if I can't, one of the good things about this is, you read somebody's resume and they apply for a more junior role and you're like, man, you could go 2 levels up. Let's present you to that team. And, they were maybe looking for $40,000 a year and you present them 2 levels up and now they're making 70 and like they cry when they accept the job offer. That's what it's all about right there.
Sure. No, that's awesome, man. Let's just say someone's wanting to look to get into that field. What kinds of things do you look for on resumes?
Yeah. So, big thing is skill set, looking at what can you do. So what I always tell my transitioning veterans is, they're looking for somebody who can replicate the success that they had at their previous employer with them. And so that is, hey, I have skills with systems, technology, processes that I can bring with me or that I can use that are in place to replicate my success. And so, I know how to do Excel or PowerPoint or Word or other technology systems. Those other data visualization systems are big right now. Or on the recruiter side, I can hold a conversation. I can do an informational interview. I can ask you interesting questions that kind of pull your personality out more so than like, can you use Excel? Yes or no? And yes. Okay. Next question. Like, you got to be a person. You got to have a conversation and just be successful with it. It's just having a personality.
Sure. Now, I don't know. For me on the outside looking in, I always think like most things can be taught. Like you can learn to do Excel. Obviously, some people are better than others, like with all the tricks and stuff and the formulas, but everything can be pretty much taught. So how deep do you go on does this person fit the quote unquote culture versus the resume, so to speak?
Oh yeah. No, that's huge. We went 100% remote back in March of 2020. And so, you used to, there's always like those jokes and memes about like, how nice were you to the receptionist? Like that was real. That was like, you went out and part of our process was like, hey, were they nice to you? Were they nice coming in and going out? How did they present themselves to you? Were they rude? Those culture fit things that were kind of easier to do in person, or now you're asking more questions of like, how would you respond to this type of situation? And so how are you to do that? And honestly, you can tell people who are jerks. They're like, hey, I'm really a big deal. And like, I don't care what you have to say because you're just a recruiter. And so I just want to talk to the VP because they're more important to you. And you're like, that's not the right answer.
No.
Being humble and being kind will get you so much further than like, I don't care if you went to Harvard, MIT. If you're a jerk just because you can do Excel formulas, that doesn't make you a right fit.
Right.
So.
No, 100%. No, I totally agree. If somebody wants to connect with you and maybe ask you questions about jobs or recruiting and stuff like that, where can they find you? Either social media or LinkedIn, anywhere that stuff.
Yeah. So really active on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out there. Just Michael McCoy. You can search me. I'm pretty searchable. Lots of connections out there. I'm sure that somebody is a mutual connection. If you're connected with Brett, you might can find me that way. But yeah, just to reach out. Love to have a conversation with you about whether you're transitioning out of the sports arena, whether you're transitioning out of the military, or just looking to get a job in a new city or in your city. I'm open to having a conversation.
Sure. Now, speaking of that, are you doing recruiting outside of Tennessee or Nashville? So the whole country?
Whole country. Yeah. I talk to people all over the United States.
Nice. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you, Mike. I appreciate it. Great to get your story and have you on, and wish you the best of luck moving forward with your job. And you're still Army Reserve, so thank you for your service, and we all appreciate it, man.
Man, I appreciate you. Thanks for the time. It's good to talk to you and your audience today.
Definitely. Thanks. My thanks to Michael McCoy. Great to have him on. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that episode, and you look at the hiring world of veterans a little bit differently as they transition back to civilian life. So hope you guys enjoyed that. Thank you for listening today. As always, you can follow me at Too Tall Sports Podcast. That's on Instagram. I also forgot in the intro to mention I'm on TikTok. So those youngins out there, I'm blowing up there all my stories and videos I like to post on Instagram and TikTok as well about my life in the minors and different sports takes that I have. So go ahead and check that out on those two platforms. If you like Twitter, it's at Too Tall Sports. I do some content there. Please check out my YouTube channel if you haven't done so already. That's Too Tall Sports Podcast on YouTube. Subscribe, like, share. We drop episodes every Thursday morning at 5 a.m. Pacific time, so you can watch the interviews there. If you like audio only, totally fine. Check out Apple Podcasts and Spotify as well. Same thing, Too Tall Sports Podcast. Leave a 5-star review if you haven't done so already. I'd like to bump those up, so I really appreciate it. It takes literally 2 seconds. You're already on the episode page. If you haven't done it, do it. I would be very grateful if you could do that. We're also on Amazon Music, Google Play, and Pandora. Wherever you get your podcasts, you can find us there. Type in Too Tall Sports Podcast. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next week for another great episode. See you later.